Hello! Welcome to Levels Plus Weekly episode 45. It's my birthday episode! Yay! So I'm going to be doing stuff that is very personable to me today. I'm going to talk about my top 15 games, and I'm going to share 25 of my favorite things in my collection. I've also got a pickup, which I'm going to talk about momentarily. This is the first episode I've recorded in 2022, so that's also pretty exciting. We're in a new year, feeling a lot of energy about the year. I wish all of it was positive, but with the pandemic still being an issue, it's definitely proving to be a bit of a wild ride on that front. But fingers crossed that this won't last forever, and life will become a bit less stressful and a bit less cautious. You know what I mean. Let's do the pickup first since I got it here. So I got the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Expanded Edition official guide. I believe Piggyback did this. I got a gift card to Barnes & Noble and was looking there for a long while trying to figure out what I want to get, and decided that this would be the thing to get because I love this game and I'm thinking about replaying it this year. So here's an example of what it looks like inside. I'll skip ahead a bit. There's some more on the inside. Just a lot of pictures, a lot of text. It also came with a map. I already have a really nice cloth map from the art book, but there we go. I want to hold it off camera. It's not really helpful to show it off, does it? I do have something else that was supposed to be here for this video, but alas, it was not. So, my birthday is Tuesday, the day you're watching this. Yay! I'm recording this Sunday, the day Levels Plus Weekly normally goes up. And I wanted to just make this a birthday video and make it very much about me. So, I actually have my top 15 in physical form, so I was able to pull up all of this stuff. And what I want to do is I want to keep this short. Because if you really want like long form gushing about these games and as well as a little bit of critique, you can check out my top 111. Here's the link. It'll also be down in the description. And I will probably also point out if I have articles related to these games as we go along. So I basically just kind of want to touch on like 3 things that I love about the games, as well as probably the biggest issue. I'm not going to do these in official order because I might change it around a bit. Thinking about Gris, and I think it needs to be higher. But then I see that it's like Aria of Sorrow is right above it. It's like, So I need to spend some time thinking about the placement of the top 15. So I'm just going to go through it like this, and then go through the middle row, and then the bottom row. And this should be interesting for me to distill what I like about these games into 3 thoughts, and then the biggest issue with them. So, with Beyond Good and Evil, outside of Ubisoft being a really crappy company, is currently my favorite game of all time. I don't think that's going to shift. So thing number 1, Jade. Jade is my favorite character in all of games, pretty much. I think she's an absolutely phenomenally well-written, well-voice-acted, well-designed character that really carries the emotional weight of the game and controls extremely well. 2, I think that the music in Beyond Good and Evil is amazing. Christophe Herral just killed it on the soundtrack with some really rich instrumentation that is worldly and really, really, really compelling to listen to. And 3, I think the game's story is a really good allegory for modern society and how we can so easily be manipulated by a political power. It's really amazing, actually, that Beyond Good and Evil exists, and it came from Ubisoft, because Ubisoft has famously, since the release of this game, said their games aren't political, but this game is very, very political. and really has a strong statement about people rising up against dictatorships. And I love it. And there's an article here that talks about how Beyond Good and Evil basically gives the middle finger to Ubisoft. Because it's the company that exists now would not make this game. It's tragic. The thing that's probably the biggest issue with Beyond Good and Evil is its length. It feels like it needs one more dungeon or one more area to explore. The game was a bit rushed, from my understanding, to try to reach that holiday deadline, which it was foolish because it eventually got outclassed by both Prince of Persia: Sands of Time and 13 from Ubisoft at the same time, and has become a bit of a cult classic since then. But it's still a wonderful game. Highly recommend checking it out if you haven't, and don't pay Ubisoft any money for it. Jade approves. I know she would. Fire Emblem Three Houses. I have a review here if you want to check out a very long explanation. But first thing that I love about Three Houses is the characters. The design is fantastic. Easily the best overall set of characters in terms of aesthetics, in terms of costuming, in terms of just how they look. I think in the entire series. I love the cast of Three Houses. And not only that, this game has some of the finest voice acting in any video game, bar none, for me. And I think that when you combine fantastic character design, wonderful voice acting, and a 99% awesome script like Three Houses has, it all comes together to make that such a powerful component of the game. Second, I love the monastery / base concept. I think that this finally nails it. They've been goofing around with it for a while with Fire Emblem games, but I think that with Three Houses they finally got it. And all they had to do was create a house system and allow you to be a professor and teach your students stuff, engage with them outside of class, have some cute little mini games that are not really complex but are fun to engage with on occasion, like the fishing mini game or dealing with the garden or cooking. Those are all really cute and add some nice little dimension to the dynamics of what's going on in the game world. And on top of that, being able to teach your students gives you a lot of flexibility on how they become. If you want Edelgard to not be an axe wielder and you want her to be a mage, you can do that. If you want Claude to abandon the bow and become like a wyvern rider that focuses on swords, you could do that. And that's what's so cool. It might not be the optimal way for them to be, but you can make them into whatever you want, which I think is just a wonderful thing to do. Third, I love the way combat works in Three Houses. I think that the dynamic is perhaps the finest that it's ever been in terms of just the core wandering around on the map and then running into enemies, having the support system there, having monsters show up that work a little bit differently. The critical animations are great, probably the best they've ever been in 3D. And just like all of it coming together with a lot of interesting maps and compelling moment-to-moment gameplay that just always keeps me on the edge of my seat, even if I'm a little overpowered. Because the thing with Fire Emblem is that at any moment things could go really wrong. And even if you're playing on casual, where your units don't die if they fall in battle, it's still really tense whenever someone does fall in battle because you miscalculated something. The rewind system is helpful as well, so if you want to use that, it's there. If you don't have to. You can choose to commit to whatever the game gives you. I think it's really awesome. I don't have any complaints at all about the battle system whatsoever. Probably the biggest issue with Three Houses is that despite having 4 plot arcs and DLC, there's points of the game that don't feel finished. And you have to kind of play all 4 routes to get a good understanding of the whole game's dynamic plot. But at the same time, there's stuff that just doesn't feel right. For me, I think Dimitri's entire arc and his run feels forced. It feels like they went too hard on making a fixable main character that a lot of people did attach to. And great for you if that worked for you. But for me, I feel like his about face from becoming like this genocidal warlord into like just quickly all of a sudden going, oh, I made a mistake, and then I was like, all of a sudden he's a good guy. I think that didn't have enough development. It didn't have enough emotion. It didn't have enough actual gravitas to make that work. I also feel, and this is related, that the DLC characters that they added in feel like they were added in. Even the Ashen Wolves, they don't have connections outside of the group that appear in the DLC campaign. So you can't like have Happy get a connection at all with like Petra or Bernie, unless the plot calls for it. Like Yuri has a connection with Bernie because they have something that worked in their past. But generally speaking, the Ashen Wolves don't get to connect with the entire cast. They only get to connect with a certain few. And then you have like Anna, who doesn't connect with anyone beyond Byleth. And then you have Jaritza, who doesn't really connect with anyone outside of like 3 or 4 people. And that's kind of unfortunate. And I feel like that is an oversight that I hope that the next Fire Emblem game, whatever it may be, addresses better. That the DLC feels more connected. But it's one of my favorite strategy games of all time, and I absolutely recommend it. Next up is XCOM 2, War of the Chosen. Here represented by the XCOM 2 collection on Switch. I will have to throw out the caveat before I start that this is probably not the ideal way to play this, but I don't like playing on PC, so there you go. So, number 1. Reason I think XCOM 2 is great is that it evolves what was great about XCOM Enemy Unknown and Within to a point that it basically eliminated everything that I didn't really care for in those games and added in so much that I loved that it's fantastic. The moment-to-moment gameplay when you're on the field fighting aliens is so compelling in XCOM War of the Chosen. And one of the reasons for that is that it really feels like you're in a chaotic battle where anything can happen. You have destructible environments. You have occasionally civilians you have to deal with that run around when they get scared. And you have aliens always off site that you just don't quite know when they're going to show up, what they're going to look like, and what they're going to do to you. And I think that's very accurate to how a war with aliens would actually go. 2, I think that the switch to making the main characters in this game be a ragtag resistance group versus a militarily funded operation like in the previous games was genius. It makes everything more scrappy. It makes everything feel more connected to the planet, to the people, that you're actually doing something to try to overthrow a dictatorship in the form of fascist aliens. It really makes everything more personable. It makes everything more connected to you. That you just feel like your ragtag bunch of soldiers are more important because there's not that many of them around. And I love that. I think that was a huge addition to just making that feel more like emotional, for me at least. Third is I think that in the process of mixing all this stuff up, they added in some really amazing stuff in War of the Chosen that makes it better than XCOM 2. The Chosen, in particular, are 3 super-powered aliens that have it out for you. They are all unique in how they interact, and they can show up at any moment until you defeat them. And that just adds that extra layer of terror that you don't know when they're going to have a Chosen show up and basically screw over what you're doing. And I think that's really, really interesting. And it happens right off the bat. So even when you were like low-level soldiers with poor gear and armor and just trying to get through a map, they could show up. And I think that is really something. Another thing about that randomness piece is that there's 3 super-powered aliens that could show up that are separate from the Chosen, that have amazing gear and are really hard to beat. And they also can show up whenever they want, once you discover them. So they don't show up immediately, but once you get to a certain point in the game, they're there. They're gonna make your life hell. But beating them is such a powerful moment, and you feel so vindicated when you actually make that discovery and it works out in your favor. It doesn't always. The thing about XCOM War of the Chosen that's probably the worst thing about it is the glitchiness. And the Switch version in particular is probably a little bit more notable in that, but even the original game, maps can get buggy, you can fall through the floor, environments could destruct without you really understanding why that happened. You can take fall damage in that process, which just sucks. The game can lock up or take a very long time to think, and at least in the Switch version they have really long load times. So while that's a problem, ultimately I love this game. I love playing it. I went through it almost immediately after beating it 2 years ago because it's that good. Just what a great game. Another wonderful strategy game. Alright, Zelda Breath of the Wild. I was just talking about it when I was thinking about replaying it because I love that game. First thing it does really well, huge world. Recaptures the essence of the original game better than any other Zelda that I could think of. And when I say that, I mean that in like the utmost praise, because my favorite Zelda outside of Breath of the Wild is the original NES game. So to have a game that goes back to that ethos of development and level design and engagement is huge for me. And I love exploring in Breath of the Wild. I think that the world is incredibly compelling and full of secrets and discoveries, and just never know what's going to be around the corner in Breath of the Wild. And I love that about it so much. Second, I think the art design on this game is phenomenal. I love the way that this game looks. I think it is a gorgeous video game with incredible character design, with incredible world design. There's not a moment in Breath of the Wild that doesn't take my breath away. Haha. Just what a great looking game. And then third, I think that Link is the most dynamic he's ever been in terms of a moveset, and that says a lot because his moveset's actually pared back in terms of options. Because he's got swords, he's got spears, he's got bows, axes. Those are your physical weapons, and then you've got the runes, and that's basically all you get through the entire game, on top of potions and food and stuff like that, and armor. But paring down the vast array of equipment and weaponry that Link has gotten over the years to this simplified thing, and then just polishing all of the options for that to perfection. Because while you only have so many options with attacking, you have more options than you ever had in terms of using those weapons. You can throw them at bad guys. Depending on the weapon, you might have elemental attributes. depending on the weapon, you might be able to ignite things on fire, for example, or freeze things, or electrocute things. If you've got a bunch of bladed weapons around, you could use like an electric rod to electrify a huge chain of stuff. It's really rad. Then you've got your runes, so you've got bombs that you can throw out. You can use magnesis to move metal objects around. You can use stasis to hit something multiple times and then send it flying at enemies. There's a lot of really cool things you can do in Breath of the Wild, and people have been having so much fun coming up with these wild ideas and executing them, like flying on a steel door across the map. You could do that. It takes some skill, but you could do that. Being able to reflect guardian beams too is incredible. That's so rad, being able to do that. And shield surfing and all this other neat stuff. It's like you get to really tinker with what you get. And I love that about Breath of the Wild. The biggest issue with Breath of the Wild, I think, is the bestiary. To be completely honest with you, I think that there needs to be more creatures to fight. I don't want to fight Listolfos everywhere, including the snow, which doesn't make any sense to me. They're cold-blooded creatures. They shouldn't be in the cold. Because what's there is so good, especially Lynels. I love fighting Lynels. And I would love to have more of the vast Zelda bestiary appear in Breath of the Wild. And it's just, you only get like 15 maybe out of so many that I just want more. And I'm hoping Breath of the Wild 2 addresses that. Move on to what says Taito Legends 2, but what really is Elevator Action Returns. My favorite arcade game of all time. And Taito's best effort by far. And why is Elevator Action Returns the greatest arcade game of all time? Well, number one, it has some of the best animation and sprite work in any video game I've ever seen. It is a gorgeous game to look at. And the environments are all unique, and the 6 stages, you're not running through samey stuff. And by having such high quality visuals, it really just pulls me in. It makes me engaged even more than most other action arcade games, because it's just such a luscious game to look at. Second, it controls like a dream. You've got 3 characters you can pick, each have their own priorities. So I like to play as Edie, and she's the gun master in the game, quote unquote, so she's got the fastest gun. And her grenade is a firebomb, which works really well. And then you get to kind of go into each stage and go, what's the best way to get through this? And you have a lot of options. So there's a lot of variety. You can use environmental like lights and barrels to engage with your enemies. So that's a really cool thing. You can use the elevators and the doors that you have to use to get around the maps as means of cover, which is a really cool thing that you can do. You can also jump into enemies, so you don't have to shoot them. So if someone gets too close, jump into them. It acts as a shot. It acts as an attack, which is a really great way to engage with enemies. And there's just a lot of options. So each playthrough of Elevator Action Returns is different, because you can go through it differently each time. You can choose to do like a melee run, where you're just jumping into everyone and only shooting enemies that are really far away. You can choose to do that. It's a viable option. You also have a couple pickups in terms of weapons that you can get: rocket launcher and machine gun. Unfortunately, the Taito Legends 2 port of Elevator Action Returns accidentally messed up the machine gun, so it doesn't actually work the way it's supposed to, but that doesn't matter. It's still a great game. Third is that it's 2 players, and you can play this game and have double the fun if you can get somebody else to play it with you. I suppose the biggest issue with Taito Legends 2's version of Elevator Action Returns is that it's glitchy, so it doesn't have the machine gun, for instance. But I have a hard time thinking of a big problem with this game, because it's so good. Everything about it is phenomenal. Honestly, that's probably the biggest issue. is that it's glitched on this port. But Taito does have an Egret Mini 2 that's about to come out, and Strictly Limited announced that they're going to bring it to North America and Europe. Or if Hamster releases Elevator Action Returns on the Switch Arcade Archives, to pick it up that way. What a wonderful game that is. Splatoon 2! My favorite multiplayer game of all time, and that's number one, is that it is a phenomenal multiplayer game that got me, a person who doesn't like to play games online, to play games online with people. It is such a delight to play all of the modes. Salmon Run, Ranked, and Turf War. All of them are fun, and each does their own thing to make it really compelling and a delight to play. The basic mechanics of Splatoon is superb, and that's my second thing that I love about it, is that using ink to traverse is such a brilliant concept that I'm amazed more companies haven't thought of it, honestly, before Nintendo did. Being able to use the ink to cover ground, use that as a means of both winning a map if you're playing in Turf War, or using it to get around, is incredible. It's such a fun mechanic to play with. And then you have all these different weapons that manipulate that very idea differently. So you have rollers that can create a path, as well as sling ink in front of you, but it runs out of ink quickly. Or you have just your blasters, which are like shotguns, where they blow up little bubbles of ink a set distance away from where it's fired. And it covers a decent amount of ground, but it also is a powerful impact if you happen to be around it. Add in your grenades and bombs, and then your specials, and there's just a wide variety of ways that you can get around the map and set up key points to traverse, as well as squid jumping to your partners in crime, so to say. And then when you incorporate that into the various modes, so like if you're doing tower control, for instance, you'll want to have a path to the tower in case you lose it. And as the tower is moving forward, you want to have probably at least one or two of your partners running around creating paths to get back to the tower quickly if you lose it, because the other team's trying to get it back. And that's that moment to moment. Again, I love saying moment to moment gameplay in this video, but that is what makes Splatoon 2 so compelling, is that the strategy element's always there. It's not just about shooting people, it's about using the environment extremely well. Third, the world of Splatoon is fantastic. I love the character design and music of Splatoon. It's one of my absolute favorites in the medium. I have both the art books for 1 and 2. I will be getting the third art book whenever Splatoon 3 comes out. I have almost all of the amiibo of Splatoon. I have a few shirts. I just love the character design. I love the music. I love the environments. I love the world. I think that the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook are all phenomenal characters. It's such a wonderful, wonderful place to be. The biggest issue with Splatoon 2 is probably the initial solo campaign. It's a little flat in terms of like engagement, and it gets a bit samey. And I think that Octo Expansion is what I hope Splatoon 3 does, because there's a lot more variety in what you do in Octo Expansion, and I think that the story is more interesting. So my hope is that Splatoon 3 takes everything that was great about Splatoon 2, adds in even more awesome multiplayer content, and has a solo campaign that harkens back to Octo Expansion. And if it can do that, then it will supplant Splatoon 2 as my favorite in the franchise. Metroid Dread, the newest game on the top 15. What a wonderful game that was. Oh, I'm thinking about how much I enjoyed it. Just getting into it, because it's the most recent thing outside of Aria of Sorrow and Mega Man 3 that I've played this on, that's listed here. So number 1, Samus's personality and the way she interacts with the environments, the world, the enemies is perfect. That's how I've always pictured Samus. There's some people that think that she should have more personality. I don't think so. I think that personally, I think that Samus is confident, I think she's badass, and she's stoic. And she's all those things in Metroid Dread. I feel that for a bit that Nintendo was trying to explore other avenues with Samus following Super Metroid didn't work. The way that Mercury's team has conveyed Samus in Dread is perfect. I love the way that she has just no profanity here to give towards a lot of the antagonists that she runs up against. Like, she's just like, I'm here doing what I do best because I've been doing this for years and I don't have time for your crap. I love the fact that with the one voiced line that she has in the game, it's in Chozo, out of respect to a Chozo that she might have even known. I don't know if she knew if she knew Quiet Beak. But I also love the fact that her other voiced line is a scream. I won't say what she's screaming about, but it is perfect. It is absolutely like, I relived that moment a few times watching streamers play it, and oh my god, it was just like so powerful for me. Oh, I'm hearing it now, and it's so good. That's what I love about Samus, is that it's just, there's things about her that Dread captures better than I think any game since Super Metroid, and I love that. I absolutely love her characterization. Number 2, I think the boss fights in this game are fantastic. They're hard, they're challenging, but the game's reload is so snappy that it's not really a pain to get back to them. So if you lose, you can develop and memorize techniques, tactics to get through. And another cool thing is that Mercury's team added in some really cool Easter egg finishes if you are creative and technical. So, for instance, you can defeat Kraid if you do some, if you break the game a little bit and get bombs before you get to him. So if you do that, you can do a special ending, which they made a cutscene for, and instantly kill him. It's rad. Really shows that there was some speed running, sequence breaking in mind when they were developing this game. And to carry that on, I feel like the final showdown with Ravenbeak is fantastic. It took me about 20 attempts to get through, but it just felt so good to actually learn what to do and face off against this figure that claims to be really important to you, and you're just like, nah. It's great. It goes well with my first point about Samus's personality. And the third point is Samus controls like a dream. She has controlled really well in other games, but I think Dread, she's the most fluid she's ever been. She's the most dynamic she's ever been. And I love that. Just being able to just move around. It definitely makes getting through each part of the game such a delight to do, because you just flow. It's instant. And when a game controls as good as Metroid Dread does, it should be applauded. I think the biggest issue with Dread, honestly, is the fact that so much of it is railroaded to a door system related to power-ups. It does make the game feel less organic and fluid, because as you go around, you're basically indirectly being signposted what you need to do to progress. That I'm going to need to get this to do this. And practically that's how the entire game works, is that you can't move forward until you have this. Until you have this, you have to wander around in this space until you find it. But it's not that hard because we've kind of set it up so you'll find it pretty quick, and then you'll come back and we'll kind of railroad you into that. That's how the game works, which I think works for Dread and what they're trying to do. But ultimately, I feel that it can become apparent that that's what they're telling you to do. And for some people, that's not going to be great. For me, it worked. I thought it was fine. But in terms of like the absolute lostness that you can get in Super Metroid is not here. You will not have that experience. And in terms of like backtracking, it almost makes more sense to wait until you have the majority of the power-ups to do that. So it kind of makes backtracking at any point a little monotonous because then you're going to have to do it all over again anyway. But outside of that, and one other small quibble that I have with Dread, which is perhaps too many buttons to do things. I think it's great. It's a top 10 game for sure, and easily the closest game that's in the series to Super Metroid. Gris is my favorite indie game ever. It is a piece of art. If anyone wants to ask if games are art, Gris is an argument for. And we'll just kind of jump in with my first favorite thing about it. Visually, it is the most stunning game I think I've ever played. The art direction is off the charts. Moment to moment, this game will not fail to impress you unless you just don't dig the visual style to begin with. The movies, the moment to moment gameplay, the just everything about Gris is stunning on an artistic front, and it is the most beautiful game I've ever seen. Adding to that is phenomenal music by Berlinist, which is my second point. The soundtrack makes this game. The sound design makes this game. I actually was just watching another streamer play Gris, and I was really paying attention to the sound design and how perfect it is. Like the Gris's footsteps when you're walking on the star constellations, and hearing, like, you can touch the bells and you hear them ring. There's such an attention to detail in this game on the sound front, and Berlinist soundtrack is part of that. Each section is perfectly composed with stirring emotional music that captures everything that's going on with the visuals and the gameplay. This is a perfect marriage of visuals, sound, and gameplay coming together. And I think that ultimately the story of Gris is the third point that I want to make, is that it is a beautifully depicted actualization of the process of grief, depression, anxiety, and fear. It captures those emotions so beautifully, and you have to engage with the understanding that Gris is going through loss. She's going through trauma, and you are living that. As you go through each area, you are basically dealing with an emotion. You are dealing with manifested trauma of losing an important person in her life. And you see that. You see the sadness. You see the anger. You see the resentment. You see the bitterness. You see the hurt. You see the pain. You see all of it. And then it ultimately comes together to acceptance, to understanding, to moving on at the very end. And it is just incredible. Nomada Studio created one of the most impactful games I've ever played, bar none. And I really feel like it needs to be higher on my list than 10th, because every time I watch it, it's like reliving that experience of playing it for the first time and just feeling that incredible emotional connection with everything that's going on. What an incredible game. If there's something I can say about Gris that I wish was better about it, it's kind of hard, because I feel like if it was much longer that it would lose some of that impact. I feel that it's pretty tightly composed. I think that probably the one thing is that her double jump probably needed just a tad more oomph, like not oomph, but flexibility. I feel like sometimes that if you just don't time the jump perfectly, you will miss. And maybe if you had just maybe a tiny bit more height with it. That's probably the biggest issue that I have with Gris, is that occasionally that double jump just doesn't land where you want it to. Other than that, what a game. What an incredible game. And yearly, I want to see what Nomada Studio is doing. It's a yearly tradition now. Alright, last in the middle row is Skies of Arcadia Legends. And I'm being specific to call it Legends because I think it's the better version of the game. I like the added content. Even though the music is a tiny bit less good in terms of the quality. But overall, I think Legends is the better game. So, 3 things. First thing about Skies of Arcadia is its characters. I love Vice. I love Aika. I love Fina. I think that they are one of the strongest trios in any Japanese role-playing game. They are all fantastically designed and are wonderfully written and just stand so strong as just like good people doing things for other people, to help people, to make the world better for everyone and to make it more equal. That is what I love about Skies, is the optimism, the sheer joy that they have living moment to moment. And even though they go through so many tribulations, they go through so much grief, and they go through so much trouble, they are plucky and they're positive through the whole thing. And I love that about Skies. I feel like they could not have done better with the main characters. Exploring in Skies is a delight. It's my second favorite thing about the game, is wandering around. You find discoveries, you find towns, you find crew members to join your party, you find moonstones, you find things to feed. What is Cupel, I think, is Fina's little creature. There's a lot to look for. And when you've got environments as incredible as Skies has, it makes it so much fun to wander around both in your ship and on the ground to find everything. That's one thing I just adore about Skies, is its sense of discovery, a sense of exploration. It makes you want to go around and find all the things. And it just does a really good job with that. My third favorite thing about Skies is I have to say that the base building system in it is excellent. On top, so about midway through, you get your own base, and you get to develop it the way that you want. It kind of goes hand in hand with finding crew members and finding materials and all that to build your base to be exactly how you want. And I've always loved that, and it's become one of my favorite things in games generally, is the base system, and I think Skies is the one that introduced that to me. I absolutely love having that base system, and it just feels good. It feels really good to have that be such a central mechanic in the second half of the game. Biggest issue with Skies is probably the random encounters. It's even in Legends, where it was dialed back just a bit, it's still too much. They needed to not be every few seconds. I love the battle engine. It's not one of my favorite things in Skies, but I do love fighting things, but I fight things too much in this game. And I wish it was tuned down just a tad. Bionic Commando, one of the greatest NES games of all time, one of Capcom's finest moments. It's right behind Mega Man 3, so I'll probably do Mega Man 3 right after that. Greatest thing about Bionic Commando is the bionic arm. Controlling that is such a unique mechanic for the NES that it's very compelling to learn, and it's tricky to master. There are some points in that game that if you don't have that arm down, you're going to lose a life. But once you actually get it and it clicks and you're like, ooh, that's some of the best gameplay I've ever experienced once you get that bionic arm down. It not being able to jump is not a problem once you actually get that sorted out. It's so good. My second favorite thing about Bionic Commando is that it has just wonderful level design that really works well with the bionic arm, and just getting through those maps is a lot of fun. There's a couple stages that are perhaps tuned a little too difficult or a little too annoyingly, but overall, just trying it's a great game that builds your skill set, and as you get to a certain point, it's like, you've got it. You're going to make it, and you're going to be challenged, but you're going to have fun doing it. And that's one of the things I think Bionic Commando does really, really well. Last but not least, I think that its overarching map system is really interesting for an NES game. I think that being able to choose your path and being able to revisit areas, go to neutral zones, and all of that, I think that's really fascinating. And then you also have these trucks of enemies that you have to avoid, but that's also where you get continues. So it's a bit of a risk reward there, because it's a different style of gameplay for those, because it's overhead versus side-scrolling. And if you don't have the right weapons or the right loadout, it could go really disastrously for you. Even though it's not anything too challenging, it can be. And that's one thing I think that it does really well, is it gives you a sense of strategy that most NES games did not offer in terms of how you approached each level. The biggest issue with Bionic Commando is probably the learning curve. Because it requires you to learn that learning curve. And if you don't engage with some of the more hidden mechanics, like being able to level up your life bar if you defeat enemies, or getting continues with the trucks, you're going to probably lose all your lives really quick and get frustrated. And the biggest thing I can tell you is to grind that first level for a bit and get a few life pips, and then it'll be a lot more easy for you to get engaged with it. But for a beginner to come into it, it's a hard game. It's a really hard game, and it doesn't pull any punches. If you don't get a hold of that arm even limitedly, you're going to run into challenges pretty quick. And it also has some stuff that's really obtuse, like in terms of if you go into a radar room, then you try to do a radio situation, but you get all these enemies on top of you because you don't have the right decoder, and the game doesn't tell you really what decoder to use after like the first or second hint about it. So you kind of have to start figuring it out on your own, and your gear is kind of like, what does what? And you've got to deal with NES era localization on that. So it can be a little rough for beginners to get into Bionic Commando. But if you take the time to level up a bit, get your life bar up a bit, it's wonderful. It's wonderful, and then once the gameplay really gels with you, it's one of the most fun gameplay experiences you could ever have on the NES or anything, honestly. We'll go do Mega Man 3 since it's sitting right next to it. Mega Man 3 has, in my opinion, the best soundtrack of all the NES Mega Man games. And that's actually one of the things that I really like about Mega Man 3, is that it introduced the idea of, oh, music! Like, that game was the first game that really made me love video game music as a whole. I can't say that experiences I had with, like, Super Mario Brothers or Legend of Zelda, while they have good music, made me appreciate the entire soundtrack in a way that Mega Man 3 did. So I have to give that game props for that. Secondly, I think that the Robot Masters stages are fantastic. I love the 8 primary stages. They all have really interesting mechanics, really interesting ideas. All the enemies are more or less unique. There's a couple repeats, but generally speaking, they all have their own vibe. And the Robot Masters themselves are really fascinating to fight. You got Shadow Man, who's so fast that if you try to take him on without the top spin, it's a real challenge. And then you've got such great pattern stuff with like Needle Man. If you can figure out how his pattern works, it's really good at getting you to get used to patterns and memorization. And then you have like such random oddballs like Gemini Man, who actually doesn't do things until you push the button. He'll shoot at you if you push the button, or he'll jump if you push the button when you defeat his clone. It's interesting. There's some really cool stuff going on with Mega Man 3 in terms of just the initial game. And then you get more game. You get the Doc Robot stages and the Dr. Wily stages, which are all more or less solid. They're not, I think, as tight as the initial 8, but they're still fun. I still enjoy them quite a bit. Ultimately, though, the big thing about Mega Man 3 is that it controls like a dream. And it's such a delight to play that game. I think Mega Man is at his perfect, like, it's like he's at his pinnacle in terms of control in Mega Man 3. Because he has the slide, which was introduced here, but he doesn't have the charge shot. So he's able to be more mobile with the slide, but he also doesn't have to rely on the charge shot to do damage as much as he did in the later 3 games. So that's one of the big reasons why I put Mega Man 3 over 2 is because of the slide, honestly. The biggest issue with 3 is that it is not as well programmed as 2. So it is glitchier, and it has more slowdown, and it can't handle the sprites as well as 2 does. But that's the biggest complaint. I mean, it plays like a dream otherwise. Super Metroid is such a wonderful game. I remember playing that the first time when Metroid Prime and Fusion were being released. And just falling in love with it. It's one of my absolutes on the list. I'm going to say number 1 for why Super Metroid ranks so high is the gameplay. It is a delight to play. Granted, it is definitely not as smooth as Dread. But for the time, I think that Super Metroid is one of the best feeling games once you got used to the way Samus moves and interacts with the world. There's a heft to Super Metroid Samus that takes a bit to get used to. But once you do, she's so delightful to control. Second favorite thing is the soundtrack. I think Super Metroid has a fantastic soundtrack and one of the best ones on the Super Nintendo. And it's a little bit undersung in contrast to some of the others. Really moody, really atmospheric, does something a little bit different than what Hip Tanaka brought to the original Metroid. Just a fantastic, fantastic soundtrack. And I gotta say that I loved exploring Zebes in this game. It's definitely a delight to wander around and try to figure out how to get to everywhere you need to go. It's not signposted quite the same way as Dread. It's not as handholdy as Fusion. It's pretty open. There's some flexibility there. You do have to go certain ways because you need power-ups to do that. But ultimately, I feel like there's a lot of freedom in Super Metroid that I really relish. That's probably the biggest factor why I think Super Metroid still beats Dread, to be honest, is the fact that there's more flexibility in terms of exploration, and the game rewards you well if you take that time. The biggest issue with Super Metroid is wall jumping. I hate wall jumping in Super Metroid, kinda. I mean, I really wish it was more like Dread, and I wish it was more like Batman on the NES, where you didn't have like a 1-frame window to make the jump work, and you had to flip directions. I wish you just tapped A against the wall. I think that would have been awesome, but I have very little to complain about Super Metroid. I think it is about as close to perfection of a game as you can get. Hotel Dusk, Room 215. Delightful 3D, actually regular DS game. It's not a 3DS game. I played it on my 3DS last time, which is why it immediately went there. I think that this is one of the most artistically creative games I've played. I love the character design. I think the artwork for Hotel Dusk is off the charts. It is beautiful for a DS game in terms of how they animated those sprites. They looks like the Aha Take On Me video, and it's incredible to see in motion. I would love to see that in an HD format because I think it would just be beautiful. And I think that all of the characters are so well written. That's my second favorite thing, is how well written this game is. It is impeccably written. And Kyle Hyde is kind of a jerk. He's kind of an ass. But I think that in the dynamics of the world that he's been placed in it suits him to be the way that he is and to interact with people, and you can kind of have some flexibility with how you choose to engage with people. But a lot of these people are just kind of jerks in their own right, and figuring out the best way to deal with them to get them to give you what you want is really compelling. It's really fascinating. Last but not least, I think that being able to use the DS so creatively to solve puzzles is just such a design stroke of genius. Closing the DS to flip a puzzle to see what's underneath. Wow. It uses the touchscreen in really great ways, and it's such a clever game when it comes to the puzzles. I absolutely love Hotel Dusk in terms of character, story, and gameplay for the most part. The biggest issue with Hotel Dusk is that it can be obtuse on what to do sometimes. You can just kind of get to a point and you're like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? And then you kind of have to wander around and check everything. And that can be a little annoying. But outside of that, and like one or two other small things, I think Hotel Dusk is brilliant. I think it's the greatest graphic adventure ever made. And I love it. I wish that Steam didn't die. Castlevania, Aria of Sorrow, the greatest Castlevania game. I replayed it recently, so I can still say it's the greatest Castlevania game. And mean it, because it's fresh on my mind. Soma controls like a dream. That's my favorite thing about Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, is how well it controls. He is so fluid. It's basically like Metroid Dread. It's they got the movement, they got the animation, they got the attacks and backdashing, all that. They got it perfect. They tuned it perfectly in Aria of Sorrow, and none of the games that followed quite got it the same degree mechanically. That feels so good. The Soul System is my second favorite thing. I love the Soul System. It's such a brilliant way to revolutionize the sub-weapon in Castlevania. It gives Soma so many options to develop attacks, to develop strategies in terms of how you're going to set up, like statistically, like do you want to have extra luck to try to get rare drops or souls in your favor, or would you rather get the strength so you can knock things out faster, or would it be better to have defense up for this boss fight? It's just so well done. The last thing that I really love about Aria of Sorrow is the fact that you have a whole nother mode in the game. You have Julius Mode. And it's basically canon, because if Soma fails, that's what happens, is Julius has to step in and defeat him because he's Dracula. It's such a clever little way to say, if you died, this is what happened, is that Julius has to come and kill you. And it's the first time that I think that they had this extra mode really work really well, because Julius doesn't, he levels up, but he doesn't have like the same depth that Soma does. But it doesn't matter, because the way they designed the castle and the way that they designed Julius's moveset works really well. It's a great bonus on top of an already fantastic game. Probably the one thing about Aria of Sorrow that I wish was a little bit better was the soundtrack as a whole. Michiru Yamane did really well with the Game Boy Advance speakers, but I kind of wish he wasn't stapled to that, because if you follow Symphony of the Night or the subsequent DS games, they all have, on the whole, better soundtracks. And while she certainly tried, I don't think that Aria of Sorrow's soundtrack is as good. And of course, I do have to say, Symphony of the Night is the better looking game, and Aria of Sorrow kind of set a standard for having the game's look be a little less visually impressive. The DS games certainly look better, but there's a lot of recycling, and I think Aria of Sorrow kind of helped put that in place, but it's budget stuff, so there's not a whole lot they can do about it. And that's really not a complaint either. It's like, that's just the nature of the hardware. So I guess I want Aria of Sorrow to be on better hardware. Last but not least is Chrono Trigger, my favorite Japanese role-playing game of all time. In fact, I can say it's my favorite role-playing game of all time. Chrono Trigger does almost everything perfect. It has best soundtrack in any video game, bar none. So that's my first thing. Second, it has a great set of characters that you can swap in and out, and they come from different time zones, they come from different eras, and they have different moves, different magics, different ways of interacting with each other that makes battles so compelling, especially when you start getting dual or tri-techs and being able to combine with other characters. That's amazing. And I love the battle system, and I love everything about the battle system, honestly. I think it's so tight and so delightful to do encounters in this game. And my favorite thing about Chrono Trigger is exploring. This game has a lot to explore, and I think one of the things that they did really well with Chrono Trigger is the fact that random battles don't exist. Battles are part of the exploration. It's part of going into an area and interacting with it. You're going to have battles. You're going to run into things. And instead of it being random, it's just part of what you do. And I love that about Chrono Trigger. I think that's such a splendid way of handling encounters. Is just make it part of the world. Make it part of that area. Make the enemies interacting with each other in that space. It makes so much sense that they would be living there, doing things in that space, instead of just like, you see nothing, and all of a sudden there's just a random rat in front of you. I mean, here the rats are wandering around. I think that's a big part of why I love Chrono Trigger, is that it does so much with the environments to make things feel living in a way that most RPGs to that point, and even some afterwards, I would argue, fail. Is that every area you wander into feels like it's been lived in, that there's things that are living there, even in places where it's desolate, like in the future. It feels like people had lived there, that things have lived there. It's great. I love that about Chrono Trigger. It's such a compelling game to go through. What is my issue with Chrono Trigger? When I have the game as my third favorite game of all time, and that's probably not changing, what is the problem with Chrono Trigger? It's hard. It's hard for me to think of a problem with Chrono Trigger because it's so good. I guess the issue with Chrono Trigger is that maybe I wish the characters had more dialogue with each other, like there was a party talk system. Because while the characters are great and interesting, outside of like story beat moments, they don't really interact much. They're just there. And it would be great maybe to have like more of the fireside chat type of thing that they did for one scene, where the characters got to talk with each other more. Or if they stayed at the end, they got a chance to talk like they do in Grandia 2. I think that would have probably helped. But there is so little that I could complain about with Chrono Trigger that was hard for me to even think of off the spur of the moment. So there we go. My favorite 15 games for you. That ended up being about an hour. So this is going to be a long episode, my friends. But we're going to switch gears and we're going to move into my 25 favorite physical things that I have about games next. But before we do that, a little cat break. Alright, welcome back. So I'm going to do this in waves, but you can see that I've changed things. So some of these are shirts too. So I actually wore this shirt first for a reason. I love this shirt. It's my favorite Metroid shirt. I just thought playing the Taylor Swift album with Samus was really cute and clever. So that's why I'm wearing it, but I will magically transition out of this shirt into a different shirt. And I've got 3 more that I'm going to do at some point. So, like I just did, through the magic of editing. This is another one of my favorite shirts. This is my Demon Days Splatoon shirt with the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook, mimicking that cover. I love this shirt so much. Alright, so let's get through stack 1. And I have to start my 25 favorite things outside of the 2 shirts I just discussed with the NES. The original NES I got in 1987, I want to say. Maybe late 86. I can't remember the exact date because I was 3 or 4 when I got it. Absolutely got so much mileage out of this thing. I used it for over 20 years, and I had it by itself for not quite 10 years. I had the Commodore 64 for a bit of that time, but in terms of like an actual home console, that was it until I got the Nintendo 64 in 96. And while it doesn't work anymore, I have just so much emotional attachment to this thing. It's really special to me. At the moment, I think my River City Girls replica fake cart is sitting in there. So that way there's something in there. But this Rob came much later. I did not have Rob with my original NES, but I love having this guy with the stack up parts. I think it's great. It looks like I'm missing my green stack up part, my block, my Nintendo block. But I got this at a flea market, probably around 2010, for $3, and it was in the box with these parts, and it was awesome. And I bought it instantly. Unfortunately, it didn't come with the attachments to actually make it work with an NES, and he has some corroded batteries inside him. But I love this Rob. I think it's just one of the coolest things I actually have picked up. So this, which I've shown off before, is my Metroid Zero Mission canvas print. I got this for a Festivus present. There's my face. A few years ago, I want to say 5 years ago now. And I love this. This is my favorite piece of art of Metroid that I have in the house. And I've always thought the Zero Mission box was the best one out of all the Metroid series. To actually have like this panned out dynamic canvas print of it is just awesome. So to the person who got me this, thank you so much. I don't know if you ever watch my videos, but I do appreciate it. So, Goldeneye 007, classic game. Classic N64 game, probably one of the most popular ones for the system. But that's not why it's here. It's here because of this. It has been signed by the actor who played Jaws in the films, Richard Kiel. I got the opportunity to meet him when I was working at a bookstore in 2008, if I remember right. And he was doing a book signing for his book that had just come out, Making It Big in the Movies, I think was what it was called. And he was gracious enough to sign my copy of Goldeneye because Jaws happens to appear in it. Now this was well after the game had come out, so this game came out in '97. And he told me a story that there was a company that was working on James Bond games. He didn't remember which one, but he was telling me that there was a lawsuit that his lawyer was pushing on his behalf because there was a depiction of Jaws that looked like Richard Kiel, more so than Goldeneye. So I don't think it was this. And the company was pushing back, saying, no, 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 this is an original interpretation of the character. This is not a likeness. Well, his lawyer managed to get a hold of a 3D modeler of the model used for James, or not James, for Jaws. And there's a bump that is distinctly Keel's in his forehead that the model happened to have. So that was how he was able to prove that that was his likeness in the game, and he got royalties from it. Which I thought was just an interesting little tidbit of insider knowledge of James Bond video games. But I consider this to be my one really cool copy of a game because it's signed by Richard Keel, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But he used to live in a small community near where I grew up, and there was a time when my mom was grocery shopping in that town, and she turned the corner and ran into his belly button because he's that tall. My mom's like 5'3". So just it's just kind of neat, you know. It's neat having that, and I do cherish that time, and I do have some stuff about it on my blog here. So rest of the stack currently up is all books. So let's start with Legends of Localization Book 2 Earthbound. I have the first one as well, and I almost picked it, but there's a reason why I think this one's a little bit more special. This came with all the stuff. So I have a signed book plate by all the people who are involved with it. So that includes Clyde, Mato, who runs the Legend of Localization, did most of the work on here, as well as Tony Kuchar and Heidi Mandolin, which I believe is his wife. I did not get that with Legend of Zelda, so that's why I didn't include it. But this is such a cool book. This is basically what I'm wanting to consider for like Culture Clash, is doing something like this when I make that book. Is to just have it be so elaborate and so detailed, and have all these cute little side notes and pictures and background as best as I can possibly do. This is probably one of the greatest video game books ever produced on localization. And I'm still waiting for the third one. I'm still waiting for it. It hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping that whatever that ends up being happens soon, because I would love to continue supporting Mandolin's work. The next book I have is I Am Error by Nathan Altis. This is all about the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, I do have to give a disclaimer that I am cited in this book, which is partially why I'm picking it. But I'm also picking it because it is one of the greatest examples of video game work that I've read. It is just a fantastic book from start to finish, and it gives a lot of history, a lot of detailed explanation of what's inside the NES and Famicom, what's different about the two. And it gets a little bit into localization, which is where I'm featured. One of my Culture Clash pieces made it into the book as an example. But this is just a great book, and I highly recommend checking it out if you are at all interested in the NES and Famicom, because it is spectacular. I'm cheating. I am cheating on the next, so I put them together, but they're my books. And yes, I consider my books to be one of my favorite things in video games because they were inspired by video games. And First of Frequent Fantasy was a 12-year effort to get it published. It was such an accomplishment for me in 2021 to finally get this done, to finally have it out there. I'm very proud of this book. I love the cover that J.D. Dixon did for me. It is everything I wanted this book to be and more. I have so much pride in it, and it incredibly informational. If you want to have a great little time capsule of what women in 2014 or so were thinking about games in terms of history, preferences, and what was going on, this is your book. I'm very proud of this. And then of course there's Femtendo, 1983 through 86, which in terms of design and in terms of execution is my favorite book I've made. I think that this is a phenomenal work on gender in video games, especially if you consider the context of it being on the NES Famicom, and understanding where a lot of the gender dynamics of characters comes from. That's what this starts, and I'm going to continue it. I'm excited to get into 87 more this year. But both of those, I have to put them here because they're both really incredible things that I've produced because of my love for games. All right, last but not least in this pile is my Gris art book that came with the signature edition from Special Reserve Games, which happens to still be the greatest collector's edition I've ever bought. The fact that you're going to not just see this, you're going to see the art, or the art that I got from it. I almost put the vinyl in here. That's just how good that edition was. It's like almost the entire thing has become some of my favorite stuff. So the Gris art book is a special edition for this. It has tons and tons of art. It's also a big book. So here's some pre-production art. Skip ahead a bit. Here's some storyboards. And concept work. Has a ribbon in it. This book is produced nicer than probably any other special edition art book I've picked up. It's absolutely incredible. I love this book so freaking much. Just looking at it again right now just makes me so happy. And Gris is, as I said earlier, one of the most artistically beautiful, wonderful games ever made. And to have all of that hard work that was done by Conrad Rose and the art team in this just makes my heart sing. It really does. 1 second as I switch some stuff around. Alright, I changed again. So this is my Linkle shirt. I love this shirt. I think it's adorable. And Linkle needs to be in more games. So this is mostly toys this time around, or collectibles. So I'll move the camera just a touch closer so I don't have to necessarily change the setup too much. So now that we're zoomed in a bit, let's run through these. So this is my Dragon Quest VIII PS2 controller. Yes, it's an actual controller. There you go. I don't use it for two reasons. One, it's kind of gunky under here. The plastic that they used to cover it was corrosive and kind of eroded over time. So it's not very pleasant to control anything with it. And secondly, I don't have the actual cord to connect it to a PS2 to use it. But that's okay. I think it's an awesome decorative piece that I'm very happy to have. And I got that at Gamers and Control. It's actually on my first trip there, if I remember right. Alright, next is the Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon in the Blade of Light glass NES casing that came with the 30th anniversary edition of Fire Emblem. This is just really cool looking. I have to admit that this is so over the top for Nintendo to do something like this. They don't typically go all out on doing like this type of level of stuff. But I love it. I think this is so cool. Since we never got an actual physical release of Fire Emblem on the NES, it's kind of neat just even having a glass pretend cartridge. We've got Madeline and Badeline, both from Fangamer. These are plushes. I love Celeste. It's one of my favorite indie games. Such an incredible story too, and just having plushes of both of these characters just means so much because they went through so much together to get to a place of understanding. It just really warmed my heart, so having them here just makes me happy. I've got some Figmas of Samus. This is specifically from Other M. I wish I didn't have the Other M one, but you know what? At the very least, the suit looks cool, so I'm not going to complain. I got Idleguard from Three Houses, and then I've got Pyramid Head back here from Silent Hill 2. I love all of these characters, so having really flexible, posable figures of them makes me really happy. I've also got a Nindoroid of Amaterasu down here, which I really like. And then I picked some of my favorite amiibo. And I have a lot of amiibo. Let's just have the record clear on that. I have probably 60 or 70 amiibo at this point. But I picked 4 that have some meaning. And these 2 are important because these were a gift. I couldn't find Lucina or Ness. And I was going through a hard time around 2016 when they were issued. And a very kind person sent me both of these for free. Happened to be the same person who sent me the Fire Emblem 30th anniversary, actually. Just a really nice guy. Really nice guy. I can't name who it is. But I just know that like this still remains one of my favorite things I've ever gotten. I cherish these amiibo and I cherish my Fire Emblem stuff because it was just so nice. Such genuine niceness to do that. So I just continue to be thankful. The other 2 are just because I never thought I would have toys of them. I never thought I'd have Richter in an amiibo format. Just generally, I never thought I'd have a Richter. And Richter is my favorite Belmont. He's the one I love playing in Smash. The fact that Smash has Castlevania and it still blows my mind. And then Banjo-Kazooie. The fact that this is an amiibo, a Nintendo-made thing of former Nintendo characters, just continues to make me so happy. Because I always thought that Banjo and Kazooie got robbed of being in Smash, and now they're there, and it's like they belong. And it just makes me really happy. So that's all of this stuff, but I've got a couple more things to show off. Alright, we're in the final stretch. I've changed shirts yet again. Let me briefly show my shirt. It's Gris from Fangamer. I have 2 of these actually. I got one for myself, and then somebody got me one for Festivus the same year it came out, and I was like, oh cool. So I'm so happy to have 2 of these. While on the subject of Gris, I have to say that probably my favorite thing out of all of the stuff I've shown is this. Followed very closely by these. These are actually some of my absolute favorite things that I have. Gris is such an important game to me, and when Special Reserve announced the Signature Edition would have a watercolor print unique to my edition, I had to buy it. I actually was at work when it came out and was trying to get it. It looked like it was sold out, but there was actually an error on their end. So I was like, oh, I at least want to get something. So I ordered the edition down from that, and then I had to talk with their special, their customer service to kind of straighten that out, that I wanted to order the Signature Edition. It looked like it was out, but then it actually wasn't. So I ordered 2 things. Can I cancel the lower one and get the Signature? And they were very kind and understanding, because they only allow you to buy 1 thing of a particular game there. So that was very much appreciated, and everything that followed, like I said, like this is still my favorite collector's edition because of how cool this is. I mean, I have an actual piece of art from one of my favorite games in my house, signed by the artist. Just I can't, you know. My heart's so full when I look at this. The other two are truly unique because there's no other ones of them in the world. This is Beyond Good and Evil Papercraft that one of my best friends made for me for Christmas one year. And absolutely nails the vibe of these games. And I love these so much. They are cherished pieces because not only are they from my favorite game and depict one of my absolute favorite characters and another character that I happen to like quite a bit, but it was made for me by someone who understood that this mattered, that this was important to me, and put in the time and the care and the craft to make it look incredibly awesome. And just, it warms my heart just looking at them, just like it does with Gris, because these are super unique things in my collection. It's like a lot of the other stuff I showed off they're not limited, you know what I mean? So it's just, this is just super cool, and it just warms my heart so much to just know that things were made and that they're unique to my collection. It's just super cool. I love it. Well, that was an episode. We got through a lot today. Next week, there's a possibility I might be taking next week off. It depends on plans. But if we go through and we do an episode, I am going to start my Super Smash Bros. Wildcat JF edition content, and I'm pretty excited about that, I gotta tell you. I think I want to start with who would I get rid of? Who would be dropped from the roster if I had any say in the matter? So that will be fun. Will be fun and contentious, I'm sure. But it's my game, so I'm gonna do what I want. So I hope you'll join me for that, and I hope that you enjoyed listening to me talk about why I love the games that I do and some of my favorite pieces. And happy birthday to me! Yay! 39. Got many more years left, and I hope that you will join me in the rest of them that I'm doing this show. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you soon. Take care.